The train hissed like it was tired of carrying hope. Clara stepped down onto the platform with one small suitcase, a thin coat, and a letter she had folded so many times the edges were soft as cloth. The town was smaller than she imagined, dusty, quiet, ringed by hills that looked like they'd been there forever and would outlast anyone who came through. A man stood a few paces away, hat in his hands. Ethan Cole was taller than the photograph had suggested, broader too, with lines in his face carved by sun and responsibility rather than age. Beside him stood a boy of about 8, gripping a wooden horse like it was alive. "That's her," the boy whispered, loud enough to hear. Ethan cleared his throat. "Miss Clara." "Yes," she said, her voice shook despite her effort. "And you must be Mr. Cole." He nodded. "This is my son, Jacob." Jacob stared at her, not shy, just serious. He stepped forward before his father could stop him. "You're not scary," he announced. Clara smiled despite herself. "Neither are you." The wagon ride to the ranch was quiet but not cold. Ethan spoke of practical things, the land, the weather, the house that needed fixing in places. Clara listened and watched the way he checked the road twice before crossing the creek, the way Jacob leaned toward her when the wagon jolted, trusting without asking. The house stood alone against the sky, not grand, not broken, waiting. That first evening Clara cooked from habit more than confidence. The stew was thin, the bread uneven. Ethan ate without comment. Jacob asked for seconds. Later, when the dishes were done and the fire burned low, Clara folded her hands in her lap. "You can send me back," she said quietly. "If I'm not what you hoped for, I won't make trouble." Ethan looked surprised, then thoughtful. He didn't answer right away. Jacob did. "No," he said firmly, "you stay." Clara looked at him, startled. Ethan followed his gaze to his son, then back to her. His voice was steady when he spoke. "My son already chose you." Clara felt something inside her crack, not break but open. Days turned into weeks. Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch. Early mornings, long afternoons, evenings that stretched. She mended clothes, planted herbs, taught Jacob letters by the fire. Ethan watched quietly, unsure what to say, careful not to expect too much. The town was slower to accept her. Some women smiled politely and whispered later. Some men stared too long. Clara kept her head down and her work honest. She had learned, long before the train ride, how to be invisible when needed. One night a storm came hard and sudden. Thunder rattled the windows. Jacob cried out in his sleep. Clara reached him before Ethan did, wrapping him in her arms until the shaking stopped. "She doesn't leave," Jacob whispered into her shoulder. "I'm here," Clara said, and she meant it. Ethan stood in the doorway, heart pounding, watching something settle into place that he hadn't known how to ask for. The next morning he found Clara on the porch, staring out at the wet fields. "You don't have to earn your place here," he said. She looked up. "I know, I just want to deserve it." He nodded. "Then you already do." Months passed. Clara laughed more. Jacob grew taller. The ranch felt warmer, quieter in the right way. When Ethan finally asked Clara if she'd like to make the arrangement official, not as a contract but as a choice, she answered without fear. "Yes," she said. Because this time, she wasn't being chosen out of need. She was being chosen out of love, by a little boy who believed family was something you decided every day, and by a cowboy who finally understood that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is let someone. The wedding was small because Clara asked for it that way. No band, no fuss, just the preacher from the next town over, a borrowed bouquet of wildflowers, and Jacob standing so close to her side that his sleeve brushed her skirt the entire time. When Ethan said his vows, his voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word landed where it belonged. Afterward, the town came anyway. Not all at once and not all warmly, but they came. A pie left on the fence post, a sack of flour on the porch, a nod where there used to be none. Clara accepted each gesture with the same quiet grace she gave everything else, never asking whether it was apology or obligation. She focused on the house. She turned one room into a school corner for Jacob, maps on the wall, books stacked neatly, a chalkboard Ethan built himself after watching her sketch the idea twice. At night, she read aloud by lantern light, and Jacob listened like every word mattered. Ethan listened too, pretending not to. There were hard days. Days when Clara missed the sound of her mother's voice. Days when Ethan woke from dreams of the wife he'd buried years before and stared at the ceiling, unsure where grief ended and loyalty began. They learned not to rush those moments. Clara never asked Ethan to forget. Ethan never asked Clara to replace. They let love grow around the past, not over it. The town tested them once, the way towns do. A man at the general store laughed too loudly about mail-order brides, said things meant to shrink her. Ethan stiffened, jaw tightening, old instincts flaring. Before he could speak, Jacob did. "She's my mother," the boy said, standing straight, "and she's the best thing that ever happened to this place." The store went quiet. Clara knelt and hugged him right there, not caring who saw. Ethan felt something deep and fierce settle in his chest, not anger but certainty. That night after Jacob slept, Clara said softly, "You don't have to fight for me." Ethan took her hand. "I know, I just want to stand with you." Seasons passed. Clara planted an apple tree near the fence. "For later," she said. Ethan built a swing for Jacob beneath it. The ranch changed in ways no ledger could record. Laughter in the mornings, music sometimes in the evenings, a table that always felt full even when it was. Years later, when Jacob was nearly grown, he asked Ethan something that stopped him cold. "Did you marry her for me?" Ethan thought carefully. "I married her because she chose us," he said, "and because I learned I wanted to be chosen too." Jacob nodded, satisfied. On the anniversary of the day Clara arrived by train, she and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sun dip low. The apple tree had grown tall enough to cast shade now. "I almost asked to leave that first night," Clara said quietly. Ethan squeezed her hand. "I know. And you didn't send me back." He smiled. "I couldn't have, my son already chose you." Clara leaned into him, the wind warm, the land steady beneath them. She had come to this place with nothing but a suitcase and a question. She stayed because the answer was love, spoken first by a child, honored by a man, and proven every day they chose each other again. Not out of duty, but out of home. The years that followed were not gentle, but they were good. Jacob left for a season when he turned 18, riding east with a cattle drive to see more of the world than the hills he'd grown up under. Clara packed his food carefully, slipping a note into his bag the way she always did, even when he pretended not to notice. "Come back," she said, steady but soft. "I will," Jacob promised, and he did. When he returned, taller and quieter, he brought stories of other towns, other families, some loud, some broken, some stitched together by luck alone. One night, as the fire burned low, he said something that made Clara stop mending. "Most folks don't know who chose them," he said. "I always did." Clara smiled, blinking fast. Ethan stared into the fire, jaw tight, heart full. Time left its marks. Ethan's hair silvered. His hands stiffened in the cold. Clara learned to read his silences the way she once read letters, carefully, with patience. On the mornings his old injury flared, she brought coffee to the porch and sat with him until the pain eased. "You didn't sign up for this," Ethan said once. "I signed up for you," Clara replied, "all of it." The town changed too. New families arrived. Old grudges faded. Children grew up knowing Clara as the woman who taught them letters, fed them soup, and never turned anyone away from the table. Few remembered she had once arrived by train with nothing but a suitcase and fear in her chest. One autumn evening, Jacob brought someone home. A young woman stepped down from the wagon, nervous but smiling, hands folded tight in her coat sleeves. Clara recognized the look immediately, the same mixture of hope and worry she had once carried. Ethan noticed it too. At dinner, when the girl hesitated, unsure of her place, Jacob reached for her hand and said, "You can stay." Clara's breath caught. Ethan's eyes softened. Later that night, as the house slept, Clara stood on the porch watching the stars. Ethan joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Life has a way of circling back," he said. Clara nodded. "It gives us another chance to answer better." Years later, when Clara's hair had silvered too and the apple tree bowed heavy with fruit, she found the old letter, the one that had brought her here, tucked away in a drawer. She unfolded it slowly, smiling at the creases. She hadn't been sent back. She had been invited forward. And long after words like mail order lost their meaning, what remained was simple and strong. A family that chose each other. First in uncertainty, then in love, and finally in forever. The ranch learned how to hold more people. It happened gradually, the way all lasting things do. Jacob married the young woman. Her name was Eliza, and they built a small house beyond the apple tree, close enough that Clara could see smoke from their chimney on cold mornings. Clara helped Eliza the way she once wished someone had helped her, without judgment, without hurry, always leaving room for choice. "You don't have to become me," Clara told her once. "Just become at home." Eliza nodded, tears bright but steady. "I think I already am." Ethan became a grandfather before he ever learned how to feel old. The first time he held the baby, his hands trembled, not from weakness, but from awe. Clara watched him rock the child by the fire, whispering things no one else could hear, promises that sounded a lot like prayers. The town gathered more often at the ranch after that. Birthdays, harvest meals, quiet evenings when someone needed company more than conversation. Clara's table grew longer. Chairs never stayed empty for long. People who had once whispered now brought their children and asked her advice. "How did you make this work?" one woman asked. Clara thought for a moment. "We listened," she said, "and we stayed." Ethan slowed with the years. He no longer rode every fence line. Some days, he only made it as far as the porch. Clara learned how to be strong without making him feel small, how to help without taking away dignity. One winter night, when the wind pressed hard against the house, Ethan took her hand and held it longer than usual. "If I go first," he said quietly, "promise me something." She swallowed. "Don't ask me to leave." He smiled. "I wouldn't. Promise me you'll keep choosing joy." "I will," she said, "but I'll miss you." "I know," he replied. "That's how I'll know it mattered." He passed in the spring, when the apple blossoms were just beginning to open. The ranch mourned. The town mourned. Clara stood steady through it all, surrounded by arms and voices and memories. When she was alone again on the porch, she felt the ache fully, but she did not feel abandoned. Jacob sat beside her that night, silent for a long time. Then he said, "You stayed." Clara nodded. "Your father taught me how." Years later, when Clara's steps were slower and her hair white as winter, a young woman arrived by train with a single suitcase and a question trembling on her lips. Jacob walked her up the porch steps and looked at Clara, unsure. Clara smiled gently and said the words that had once saved her life. "You don't have to earn your place here." The woman cried. The circle widened again. And so the story didn't end. It settled into the land, into the people, into the quiet truth passed from one generation to the next. Family is not where you come from. It's who chooses you to stay.